Joby from Oz here. Today we're looking at a pile of bits that the old man, Joby's old man, has brought around to double check his logic and see if we can't make some sense of a few issues we had with it. So it's a gear selection and throttle control of a SpaceSailer 27 motor yacht. We can see one little identifying mark down here on this pressing which says Merc, standard and OMC, two other little offsets which adjust, I think, the travel that a cable would have depending on where it's drawn from. We've got some mechanism here which allows for a selection and then an over rotation, and this one here drives our gear selection, forward, reverse, and then this is our throttle, full throttle, full throttle. There's a couple of things we didn't have in this, and the first thing we found was that there was an arrangement of some bolts, and at the bottom of this, in the manual for the motor, it said something about a cutout so that you wouldn't start the motor in gear. And in my box of bits I've got a little micro switch, and it makes sense that that micro switch sits in there, and as we go into a neutral position we actually get a switch sense on neutral. So that's the first mystery solved, that there was a position for neutral switch, one side or the other, and depending on which way you had it wired out you would move this pin across, depending on which way you wanted the wiring coming out of the control. But yeah, that's a neutral switch. The switch, the other side of it, is just held in place by the casting, so there is no other screws. The screws coming from that side is what holds it into place. Alright, so that's first mystery solved. Reverse neutral lockout switch. Then we had the question of, on the other side of this housing, an issue where ordinarily when you push the lever forward or backwards, you're selecting forward gear or reverse, and then as you pull further you get throttle coming on. But if you're in a neutral position, you actually pull the lever sideways and then push forwards or backwards, which gives you throttle but leaves you in neutral. And what was happening is that we couldn't find that slideways position all the time. It was a bit vague on this control. And feeling around in the back of the unit, we found that there was this piece of metal that needed to be able to drop into this tag to be able to pull sideways. When it was offline, then it wasn't allowing the sideways pull, which meant you couldn't select power without a gear. When we first pulled it out, there was a slight bend in this piece of metal as well, which Dad has straightened out. And what he surmised is that that was actually allowing it to move inside here, separate to the plastic housing. In the back of the gear rotator, there's another pocket, which when this is pulled sideways, actually locks in and locks the gear rotator in position, so that won't move. And on the other side of it, we've got a secondary dog clutch arrangement, so that when it comes sideways you can actually rotate the throttle shaft and it disengages from the gear selection shaft. So those items together seem to work pretty well. You want to be able to push sideways, rotate, at the same time as locking the gear selection in neutral when you're doing that, so that you've got full throttle or part throttle but no chance of dumping it into gear. So I'll pass the camera over to Dad and we'll show a little bit of how we found the assembly to go. Essentially on this side we want that item to go that way around, and then we've got our gear selection there. From this side we have the shaft coming through. Actually, we'll look at that from that side. So we've got a shaft dropping through, the single gear between the other two gears so that it can go past or the other way. And then let's hold the back of that in place with that, turn over. Now with this spring, we've got a lock through that position there. And the spring essentially is what puts side load on that handle to allow it to come sideways. And possibly looking at this, it's actually been pulled harder than it wanted to be whilst it was out of line. It's bent that piece of metal. But in that position, and with this piece over the top, we can now put a bolt in.
It's your third hand.
Yeah. What's that? Ambidextrous?
That's the one. Close enough.
Somewhere near it. Okay. I'll just nip that up. Okay, so we can see there that at rest that this piece here is actually held into the plastic, and being held in the plastic stops the spring piece from turning but allows this element to turn separate to it. When we drive that from the handle, we're essentially getting full rotation, and on the other side, we'll turn it over. We're getting the full rotation of these elements like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take these pieces out. Actually, we'll get this piece. There's a brass detent that goes in. Okay, so we've got a brass detent and spring plate. What that gives us then is that positive click forward and reverse, and that ties into our gear shift position. Forward, reverse. Once we've got that forward or reverse gear position, we then have another detent click out and allows us to go to full throttle, back to zero throttle, still in forward, back to neutral, reverse, full reverse, neutral, and back again. So that all looks pretty good. And by straightening this piece of metal here, we then have that lockout capability, which if we drop in the screw that holds this bar in, Wade, enough. So now we've got a sideways ability and the ability to turn free of the gear selection. And on this side, you can see that that plate is pulling in, so that's an additional safety holding it in neutral. And then back to neutral position. So that's all pretty cool. Then we have the mystery goes further. That piece goes onto there. Turning ourselves over. We've got this piece here, which I think from memory goes that way.
Angles, yeah.
And that can be reversed depending on which way your boat, whether it's port or starboard throttle, you can change which way is forward and reverse. Yep. So we're not lubricating as we put this back together, we're just basically doing it as an assembly process. So checking that. Forward and reverse. Drives this one. Then once we're far enough forward, we have a throttle. Neutral, reverse, full throttle, reverse. So that's all. Next, what do we want to do? We want to turn this over. We've got a piece that goes in. Which way up? That way up? That way up. There we go. So this piece of plastic holds the detent from falling out sideways. That goes in. Then we have our next piece.
The chassis plate holds that plastic restrainer in that location.
Yep. Now this other plate comes over the top. Now we've got an adjuster here and a spring-loaded plate here. Now we think this is putting sideways load on this piece, which potentially is an extra
Resistance.
yeah, damping for this particular going from neutral to forward and reverse. So you've got the spring detent. You've also possibly got a side load here. That's as much as we determined for that part. That goes on there. That goes on there. Before we put that on, let's come back this way up. We've got our throttle plate, which turns a rotation into a linear motion. We'll just have a quick look at that. Which was when we go into gear, then we have motion once we're in gear. So you can see from that there's no throttle until after it's in that position. We've got a plate that goes over the top. To give that sideways support, we turn back over this way, and there's a locking plate that holds this spring and this casting. Back down that way, yeah. All right, then we've got some short and long screws. The short screws we found came at this end so that we had the clearance for this part. And the long screws were on this end where it didn't seem to matter at all. Obviously, stainless on stainless, you want to be a little bit careful. You want to do some sort of assembly lube, anti-seize or never slip or something like that. And probably needs a bit of a thread cleanup, so we'll just leave that. Actually,
Yes.
a bit skew, that's why.
You probably find it's 180 degrees, that one.
Possibly. Where's the fun in that?
That's fine, man.
There we go. That's all right. So that's captured in there. We've got this particular piece here, which we think goes.
2 bolt holes here.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's looking like where it's
Oh,
got
same on the
witness
other
there.
side. Okay. Yep.
Uh,
They bolt on there.
so nut and bolts.
Yep.
Oh, yep.
Couple of those. Couple of those.
Okay. And then we've got a pin and a
this.
boss, right?
That comes from underneath with an E-clip.
Okay. A clip of rod. Alright. one's got a nylock and one doesn't. Is that right? I think the nylocks must be the other ones. I'll go this way. Let's pretend that these are not nylocks. Obviously, in a boat situation, you want to make sure none of this falls apart, so a bit of Loctite or something would probably be a good idea.
Oh, she goes the other way.
See?
Yeah. The nut actually fits into that casting there.
Oh.
And holds it. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be clever, wouldn't it?
That's
Let's
right.
do it. Let's do it. Can't do it the wrong way around. It's not on camera. Check that out.
That way.
Hey, perfect.
Where that other one was.
So there was two bolts that held the cable bracket, this thing.
Yes, two long
They
bolts.
were
There's two long
those
bolts there.
two.
And there they
those
had
ones.
the locks,
Yeah.
nylocks. So two of those we've got. This is actually holding the other end of that, I think.
Oh yeah, that sounds sensible.
Belt and braces, holding it all together.
Okay. Oh look, we've even got a hole there, don't we?
So,
No, maybe screw threads.
so
Let's go with that one instead. Captain. Cheesehead. Alright, so inside the boat we then had an assembly which held throttle cables. There we go. In some
yes, a couple
yeah,
of metal
locking collars there. And then,
bolts on up here.
yeah,
That's an easy fix.
to do it.
Yep. So we've just got. Tell me about it.
1, 2, 3, 4. And then the 3 screws would have been what held the thing into the boat.
There you go.
1, 2, 3.
That's the go. Other way up. I think.
No, it's not in the hole. That's what she said.
I think it went the other way.
Yeah, suppose.
You know what I mean?
Oh,
No?
yeah, that one.
So those were.
Yeah, I can see the
Still
plate.
light with it.
Yeah.
That's the go.
Except it's the next hole, aren't I? And that basically sets your throw, maximum or minimum or whatever your motor's throw is. 2. Alright, so coming through the side of the boat, 3 screws here, hold the housing in, then our lever goes in. So we have forward, reverse, forward, full throttle, back to 0 throttle in forward, neutral, reverse, full throttle, reverse, neutral. Looking from the other side, forward, on our gear lever, throttle, full throttle, neutral, 0 in forward, back to neutral, reverse, full throttle reverse, reverse no throttle, neutral. And then when we pull sideways on our handle, we have the ability to go full throttle without changing gears. So you'd be in neutral, part throttle when you want to start the engine, because obviously you don't have the gears.
Job done.
Job's done. Bit of lubrication, bit of paint, bit of corrosion protection, but that's doing what it should be doing now.
So
And that's your neutral lockout.
excellent.
Thanks for playing.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah.